Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to the grand finale of our Mom Me Time campaign. Solh Fiesta, the first of its kind mental health mela for mothers. This has been organized by SOLH Wellness, and I'm your host for today, Kapil Gupta, one of the founders of SOLH Wellness. And we have with us, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Miss Nandana Dev Sen, multifaceted, talented, and what I consider truly as a supermom. She is a writer, a child rights activist, an award-winning actor, a mother. Nandana Dev Sen is the author of 6 children's books, which have been translated into 15 languages globally, and 2 collections of our translations of the poetry of her mother, Nabanita Dev Sen. She grew up in India, England, and America. She has starred in 20 feature films from 4 different continents and in numerous multiple languages. Nandana's first book, Kangaroo Kisses, was selected by 320 UK nurseries as a book of excellence. And her interactive workshops have been loved in person by more than 30,000 young people across the world. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard University, where she won the Detour Book Prize, as well as John Harvard Scholarship and Elizabeth Agassiz Award for each year, and studying filmmaking at the USC School of Cinema Television. Nandana worked as a book editor, a screenwriter, a translator, and advocate for child protection, and as Princess Jasmine in Disneyland. The winner of several Best Actress Awards, the Wingward Poetry Prize, as well as the Last Girl Champion Award for Lifetime Achievements in Child Protection. Nandana has served on numerous child rights commissions and juries of global film festivals and international literary prizes, including the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. As an advocate and ambassador, she has represented such prominent organizations as UNICEF, Operation Smile, Rahi, Apne Aap International, and the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights to fight against child abuse and to end human trafficking. Nandana is the Globe Child Protection Ambassador for Save the Children Foundation, India, a global author advocate for girls' education for rooms to read, and a director of the Women's Refugee Commission, New York, where she serves on the Programs and Advocacy Committee. Nandana has recently published her poetry book, Acrobat, which has been published by Juggernaut Books. She translated her mother's poems. Nandana, I did not want to hog the entire attention, but your introduction needed this kind of a space. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for that very warm and really very generous introduction. It's a delight to be here with you, and I want to thank you for bringing much deserved and greatly needed attention to mental health. I always feel that we do not focus on it enough, and I'm so glad that through SOLH Wellness you have given us an opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much for that. In fact, this entire initiative is based on one of our key learnings. And the learning starts from we all, like you said, we all don't give enough attention to our mental health. And, in all of our work, what we realized was while we keep saying we don't give enough attention on mental health, in reality, most of our life, most of our active day work is purely our mental health. What we eat, who we meet, where we travel, who we party with, how we sleep, which gym we go to, which music we listen to, what movie we watch, almost everything outside of, I always say, outside of a few basic chores and a few basic much needed required stuff in our jobs or in our education, depending on our age. Everything that we do is essentially mental health. We just don't have the right vocabulary, the right tools, and the right framework. At SOLH Wellness, that's our mission.
That's wonderful to know.
And, one of the elements that we wanted to cover in today's session, of course, this is, Solh Fiesta for mothers. And while we are talking motherhood, we wanted to bring somebody like you, not just to talk about your experience as, a child activist, which is a motherhood of its own kind, but also we wanted you to come in and talk to us about being a celebrity mother. And there are numerous challenges that would be associated with it. So we wanted for you to start off with, actually, before I get to the questions, I would want you, if you can, for introducing to our audience, if you can read something from your poems, something, that's one of your favorites.
Okay. Well, well, there's one poem that I really love is called Right Now Forever, and it is about the innate strength of every woman. And it's a poem that I love to read to adolescent girls as well as mothers, because I think it gives us a lot of strength. But there's also another poem that my mother wrote when she became a mother about the experience of about how life changes, the power that you get, the gift that it is to be a mother. So you can choose which one you'd like me to read. I'll read that one.
Let's start with the book that your mother wrote when she became a mother. I think that will be a great start. And in the middle of the program, we will ask you to please read the other poem as well. And then I have a very special request for you at the end of the program.
Okay, lovely. My Didi is, her name is Nandana Dev Sen, and this is a poem that my mother wrote when my Didi was born, who was my mother's firstborn. Antara. Antara, rising from deep within primordial waters, like the first sun, forever new, forever old. You made me the universe. History and prehistory file through me now, hand in hand, in constant evolution. Antara, by your blessing, I have won the sacred right to enter and stand in these timeless halls of gold with my four mothers. Now, clasping your two tiny hands in mine, I hold the future in my debt through your birth. Antara, in an instant, you have filled all time. By your grace, I am now coeval with the earth.
Fantastic. This has all the tenets of the right poetry. I could almost see the scenes and the situation while your mother was writing it.
Yeah, she was a wonderful mother, and she was a wonderful poet. And I think a lot of her poetry sheds light on her, on the way she saw herself as a mom. So
sure.
It's beautiful.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect start to this session. So let me start by asking you a few questions that have always intrigued me. As a celebrity mother, having kids around, what challenges have you faced, and how have they affected your relationship with them?
That's a great question to ask. I have to say that I was also a celebrity kid, in the sense that my parents were celebrities too.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't I was a celebrities kid. My mother was a celebrity mother as well. And so I found that, so I was kind of well prepped in that. I think my mother was really great about making sure we had a very normal childhood, even though we couldn't step out of the house without my mother being surrounded by fans and people wanting to do pranam and taking her autograph. This was before the time of selfies. And once, phones came into everybody's hands, we couldn't go anywhere without selfies being demanded of us. And I think, she and my grandmother, and in all fairness, my mother also had a celebrity mother, because my grandmother, Radharani Devi, was also a very beloved poet and writer and activist as well. So she had, and so was my grandfather. So she had, both her parents were celebrities in a way that it's very similar to us. And I think what you need to do, with my child, there are a few additional layers, because I think when you're in the public eye as a writer, it's a little bit different from when you're in the public eye as an actor. Sure. So a lot of the attention that you get is very it's lovely, but it's very sort of physicalized. So
Mhm.
how do you raise your child in such a way so that there is not an overemphasis on the importance of the physicality? But in our family, there's always been a huge focus on your thinking, your writing, your creativity, your moral compass. I think all of those things, your values. So I think downplaying the focus on the physical, that focus that comes automatically when you're in show business, I think, has been something that's been very important in our relationship. And I also, I understand that I will have limited control over social media as she gets older. She's still 8. She's very
Mhm.
young. I don't really want her to have to engage in that. But it's very interesting because she likes to actually be represented as a part of my life, which indeed she is. She's a very, integral. She's kind of the central part of my life, as every child is for every mother. And she wants my public identity to acknowledge that, which is actually great for me to see, because I also want to raise her in such a way that she has she believes in her agency, that she understands that even as a child, you actually have an impact on the world around you, how you are represented in it. So it's so we figured out, and because she's also noticed that sometimes with celebrities there's a big disconnect between your public life and your private life.
Mhm.
And that's sometimes that's a really great way to be also. I think that's
Sure.
very healthy, and that's wonderful in certain situations. In our situation, it's kind of lovely that she engages with my public life. So when I'm in doing a reading, she loves to actually hold all the books open when I'm doing the signings, for instance. She likes to be there, engaging with my public life. When I do my children's sessions, she likes reading with me or kind of being part of the session. And she really takes kind of pride in it. And I feel like that's a little bit different from the way I was raised with my mother. By my mother, she took me to everything that she did, and I was there as an audience. But in this case, my child wants to be a participant. And I think what that does is that it kind of normalizes being in the public eye. It doesn't seem like, oh, that's a huge and thing. It's just part of your life, and you take it in your stride. I also like the fact that I don't present a personality to the public that's different from the personality that she sees at home, so I think that for me, that's important. I think for other people who are in the public eye, the strategy for protecting yourself and your family is the opposite of that. So I think it's a very personal choice how you do that.
Mhm.
But I think the most important thing is to understand that, and for a child to understand that public attention is not what makes any of us, that our happiness does not lie in that's a part of your life. But what makes you happy is something that comes not from outside but from within, and that your family and what you believe in and how you live your life, and especially the importance of kindness, because I think when you're very active in public life, and you're kind of there's a public persona that you need to play out, sometimes those other things, I mean, and we do that when it's kind of like a performance, right? Every time you're on air or in an event, you're being yourself, but it is a performance. And I think it's important for children to understand that what matters ultimately is the truth of who you are, not the performance.
Sure. That's wonderful. Looks like you and your daughter have both embraced this, wholeheartedly and are really enjoying it. So, on the same lines, how do you balance the demands of being a full-time mother with the demands of the busy career that you have?
Yeah, I gotta say that it's hard. I mean, I'm much slower at writing now, finishing a book now than I was before Megla came into my life. My first few books I published um, when Megla wasn't in my life.
Mhm.
But now it's much more of a challenge and it's sort of being a full-time mother and then being also a full-time writer, being also a full-time child rights advocate, which is a large part of my life. And actually, you said something very beautiful earlier, which I appreciate. You said that's another kind of mothering. It really is.
Mhm.
Uh, feel the kind of responsibility and accountability. Feel accountability uh, to that work in the same way that I feel accountable as a mother, actually. And it's a work that I've been engaged in for much longer, from when I was barely a child myself. So that's been most of my life. So, I mean, when I was just doing this as an exercise the other day, just looking at the hours that I spend a day, and I realized that actually my primary identity, which is that of a writer now, is what ends up getting least time, because the hours I give to mothering and the hours I give to child protection take up so much. I mean, that they're both like, I mean, that's what takes up all of my hours, and I have to find a way of managing my time so that I actually am able to spend the time that I need to spend on writing. So um, I am not going to suggest that I've figured out a solution to this, because I haven't.
Sure.
I'm still
I
searching.
guess that's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
Um, so, with your busy career, I mean, we are today, while celebrating motherhood, we are focused on talking about mental health. So, I guess I want to ask you, how do you ensure that you are able to prioritize your child's mental health and well being along with your own?
Yes, I think it is really, really important to figure out every child is different. And the way they stay, I mean, for my child, she's very active. She's a very energetic, physically active.
Mhm.
Her energy is more like a boy's. I mean, I don't want to gender stereotype, but the kind of running around and hyperactivity that she has is you see more often in boys. So with her, I know that she needs to be engaged in things that she really loves, apart from doing obviously homework and stuff, which is not at her age, is not very much. So I mean, she's a dancer, she's an artist, she's a beautiful artist, actually. If there's time, I'll take you around the room and I'll show you her artwork. My living room here is like a gallery of her work. And and sometimes, I mean, children are extremely sensitive. And there are times when I see her struggle with, and I'm very open about this. She has some learning challenges. She has dyslexia, quite severe dyslexia. And I can see that affect her self-esteem. Um, and that's the sort of thing, it's interesting because I always took that for granted. There were other things that I am very bad with, like directions. I can get lost in my own street, and my daughter, even before she could read a single word, could read maps perfectly, because she's very, very, she's visuospatially very wonderfully talented, which is one of the things that makes her a great artist as well.
Mhm.
And, great designer. I couldn't do any of that stuff, and I get lost all the time, but I've never had issues with reading or writing. I've always taken it for granted, right? So how do you relearn what you have prioritized and taken for granted around what your child's needs are? A lot of my mental health depends on, I mean, all of it actually depends on my child's mental health, right? So re-looking at what I held important and how I assumed one learns is very important. And with her, the art is really important to her. She knows she is good at it, and she loves it. She does a lot of it. She's also a dancer. She's been doing ballet and hip hop, and she used to do a Kathak for years, but now her lovely Kathak teacher has moved to Boston. But so dance is another way, and I think I see how much of a difference it makes when she's doing all of that on a schedule. as opposed to when she's not able to do it, and it does, and so I think, I mean, I've learned a lot about my own mental health through understanding what my daughter's needs are. I think I've always been so busy that I've never prioritized how important it is to just schedule time that when you're just doing something that you enjoy, not something that you need to do and enjoy. Like, I enjoy my child rights work, I enjoy everything that I do, but something that you're doing not because it serves any purpose other than the fact that it gives you happiness, right? That's the kind of thing that I have ignored for a large part of my life. And now that my daughter is in my life, for instance, we never used to have movie night, but now every Friday it's on the schedule. We have to go get a big tub of popcorn. We have to see a movie, and it's just, it's lovely to understand how much of a difference that it makes. And if we ever miss it, my daughter actually remembers, and then I have to make up for it sometime during the weekend, so that we're all, so that the balance is all squared away. So yeah, I think I don't think I've learned the importance of having to make time for yourself and for things that are just fun. I so struggle with finding enough time for everything that I can't say that I've managed to implement it in the way that I would like to do, but I think I do have a better understanding of it.
Sure. Can you talk about, some ways in which motherhood has probably changed your perspective of life and work? And, I'm interested in positive, but I'm also interested in certain negative experiences that you have had as a result.
As a result of motherhood? Well, you know what? I can honestly say that I don't think I've had any negative experiences from motherhood, except that, I mean, and it's not a negative, I think it's something that every mother feels, is that your anxiety level goes up a lot more because you're now responsible for another life, right? So I've become a warrior in a way that I wasn't. I was never. I was naturally somebody who did not worry. And I feel like I've changed in that I'm naturally somebody who now worries about, anything and everything that could happen to my child. And I think that's the only, way in which I feel something has crept into my life. I think I've become a bit more, there's much more worry in my life now, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad. I mean, I think it's neither bad nor good. It's just the way it is, but I think I'll tell you a story. A lot of people ask me why I'm not doing films now, and I think, I mean, and I've never gone into talking about it in detail, but I decided a long time ago that I wanted to adopt a child. When I was a child, I told my mother, because it really bothered me. I mean, this was when I started working in child protection with the street children in Calcutta. I said, when I grow up, when I start a family, I'm going to adopt. I wanted to give a home to a child who didn't have a home. And then that was not only a goal as a child, but then as a young adult and as a woman. And at some point, I realized that I was so busy. I also have always had quite an eccentric career as an actor, because my choices have always been very kind of unique, and I've done films all over the world, usually independent small budget films, usually all films with some kind of a social or political conscience, whether it was rights of disabled children, as in Black, which was my first kind of mainstream film in India, or The War Within, which was a film about religious intolerance, set in New York, or The World Unseen, which is about apartheid and gay rights in LGBTQ rights in South Africa, or The Censorship of Art, which is Rang Rasya, which was my last film. they've all been, it's not a typical slate of films, and I would fly all over the world to make them. And then at some point I realized that I just have to say no to anything that comes my way, as no matter how much I love the project, because if I don't do that, I will not be able to make the space to have a child. And I was very sure that I don't think there's anything wrong at all at being a busy mom and having lots of help to help you with your child, with your child's growth as you're busy living your life and doing your work. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But because I had already done a fair amount of work, I was very clear that when I became a mother, I wanted to be able to spend all my time. I didn't want to be going away on a trip, doing a film in another country when my daughter was home. I was very, very clear. So I had to kind of really be very tough with myself and say, no, I'm not beyond. So I decided that over 10 years ago, that about actually 12 years ago, that would be it. I wasn't going to do any more films until my daughter is old enough. And then, they'll pretty soon, in a couple of years, she's not going to want me to be around. She's going to be a teenager, and she's not going to, she's going to want much less time with me. And that would be a time to, I'd very happily go back to doing more acting. So my life, literally, in terms of what I was doing and how I was spending my time, and geographically where I was living, and it all kind of changed dramatically because I wanted to be a mom and I wanted to adopt a child. And I'm really, I don't have any, it's the, I mean, I'm sure every mother feels like this, but I think it's the most marvelous experience, and not just experience. I should say it's the most, I think it's the deepest part of my identity. I have an identity as a writer, as an actor, as an activist, as we all have so many identities, but I think the identity that I take the most pleasure in is certainly my role as a mother.
Sure. And looks like you have made a rather empowered choice by cutting down on on movies, or cutting down on your role as an actor for a while waiting for a change of scenery from "Mom, when are you coming home?" to "Mom, when are you going away?"
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I have to say, I'm so grateful that Megla she's a very cuddly girl, talking about mental health. And again, every child is different, but Megla is very, very cuddly. So, and she's also super sensitive, like emotionally very intelligent. And so it's that kind of cuddle time is super important for her still. But at some point, I know she's not going to, I'll want to cuddle her, and she'll be like, oh, go away from me. Please don't embarrass me. Yep. Right. So, but she's, when my mother passed away, and I was very, very close to her. I was very lucky to have a very intimate, relation bond with her. And it was also a very strong friendship. But she was, when she left us, I was really, I went through a very dark period, and I was really depressed. It was also the pandemic. So she died just before the pandemic hit us. And then the world went into lockdown. That's actually when I wrote my book of poetry that I just read from. I translated my mother's poetry, but that's when that book came together. And actually, which was great, because again, going back to your earlier question, I don't think if I had that project, I think because you were locked down, you couldn't talk about your mental health. You couldn't go see a therapist. You couldn't even meet your friends. You couldn't meet your family. You couldn't kind of just you couldn't hug somebody and sob, all the things that you do to take care of yourself when you're grieving, I couldn't do.
Sure.
But because I had this poetry, I think that I was translating, I first it kind of made me feel connected to my mother because I could hear her voice as I was translating her poetry. It was as if I was continuing a conversation with her. But also just the process of, when you translate, you have to find words for someone else's feelings, someone else's sorrow. My mother's poetry is very soulful, actually. I may read a poem that she wrote about my grandmother when she was very ill. And it's a poem that I kept going back to when my mother was ill, because it seemed like she had written a poem about me, but it was actually a poem that she had written about my grandmother's illness. And her poetry is very, very intense and quite full of pain. But when you have to grapple to find words for to express someone else's pain, something about that process kind of was therapeutic for me.
Sure.
It was cathartic and therapeutic, and it really helped me. But what I was going to say is that to give you an example of the ways in which, so I was going to say that my daughter was a huge source of support to me. I mean, she was 5 then, she was a little thing. She was very close to to her grandmother, my mother. She loved her very much. I was also very upset, but she would understand in a moment if even before my eyes would fill with tears, she would know that I had started thinking about her and I was feeling sad. So we'd gone to see a play. It was the first time we went to a theater after the pandemic. And this was in England, and we went to see a musical, and my mother used to love musicals. I would always take her to see a musical, whether in London or in New York, wherever we were traveling, we would always do that. And the lights dim, so she couldn't even see my face, my child, but she could somehow feel that I felt sad. And Megla has always had someone called Nini in her life, who's her imaginary friend.
Okay.
Nini often has dinner with us, and whenever Megla does something naughty, of course, it's Nini who has done that. It's
sure.
Nini. And when my mother was sick, there was that one year when I spent a lot of time in India, actually, and my husband was taking care of Megla a lot of that time in New York. So Nini became even more present in her life because I was gone for that time taking care of my mother. So anyway, she says to me, she somehow understood that I was thinking of my mother and feeling sad. So she took my hand and she said, I know you're thinking about Dimma, but you must not be sad, because you must know that Dimma is your imaginary friend now, like Nini, and she follows you everywhere. And I just thought, that's exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And in her 5-year-old way, that's the wisest thing anybody could ever have said,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So let me ask an interesting question. We all, as parents, make our own choices. And there are people around us that like or that sometimes dislike the choices that you made. Can you share a scenario where there was some negative criticism or comment or, some approach to your parenting choices or your way of working? And how did you deal with that criticism?
My parenting choices, no, but I have to say that a lot of people didn't understand why I wanted to adopt, and the fact that I had made that decision as a young girl, and that it was not really a negotiable decision. That was the way I wanted to become a mother. So there was a lot of kind of not from my family at all. I didn't get any. I mean, my family, my mother was the first person that I discussed it with, and when I was a teenager, and she was always super supportive, and so was my whole family. But a lot of people around me there was a lot of pushback against my choice of adopting. But I think in terms of how I'm raising my child, I'm not saying that people don't have criticisms. They haven't voiced them to me.
Sure.
I don't know if they do, but I mean, as an actor, of course, like when you're in the public eye, people assume, especially if you're a woman in the public eye, this doesn't happen as often to men, but if you're a woman in the public eye, whether you're a writer or an actor or an artist, people assume that your choices, even if they're not about work, your choice about what you're wearing, like, you know, or what your hair do. Hillary, how much grief did Hillary Clinton get for her hairstyle or the suit she
Or her
wore?
pants and suits.
Or what does it have to do with anything, right? And similarly, I think, you know, I have never been particularly I don't know. I don't see myself as a very kind of fashion conscious person. And the number of times I got kind of, you know, called out for fashion faux pas, or, you know, wearing I mean, and sometimes quite legitimately, because I remember for the Black premiere for when the movie Black came out. I mean, I'm also very, very absent-minded. I'm really, yeah. So I can do a lot of, I can be quite forgetful. So I was wearing this black dress because we'd all decided that we were going to wear, everybody was going to be in black. And then I was choosing between two shoes because I didn't have a fully black shoe. So there were two shoes that I was trying out on, and then the car came and I went wearing a different shoe in, you know, on each foot. So of course I got called out for that. I mean, that is completely legitimate. But there were lots of other times like, oh, how can she do this with that, you know, whatever. And thankfully, it was always water off a duck's back. It never bothered me, you know. It always was something that was quite hilarious, and I would very often agree with them. It just it didn't upset me, but I got a lot of criticism. But what did upset me is that, you know, when I was criticized for film choices, or when I mean, even now I get a lot of, when I did Rang Rasia, there was, I mean, it ultimately ended up being a film that people really loved, but for a while there was a lot of controversy about it because, you know, there was a scene there where I'm posing for Raja Ravi Verma, and it was the first time apparently that in any Hindi film, any Hindi actress had bared her breast, and it became a big sort of scandal, and I got a lot of nastiness happened around that. And it's interesting, again, talking about parenting, it's the kind of thing that I feel what I was saying earlier is that it's really important to de-emphasize the physical, but I think it's also equally important to embrace your body, especially if you're a girl, especially now that girls gain puberty so often. I mean, I think so young.
So young.
So young. I mean, it's very different from when we were growing up. I think now girls get puberty at 10 so frequently. And, you know, my daughter is going to be 10 in less than 2 years. So I feel like it's really important to embrace your body. So we've actually spoken about that, and I've talked to her about the fact that I made that choice, and how people reacted to it, and how upsetting it was, because I don't want her to feel shame for any part of her body, you know? So anyway, so that's the kind of thing that somebody may say, oh, you know, I don't know that you should be talking to your child about your film in which you appear partly in the nude. That may not be the right thing to do, but for me that is the right thing to do. So you know, I think if you have a pretty strong sense of what feels right to you, so much of mothering or fathering, I mean, so much of parenting is intuitive. I mean, I don't think there are right and wrong rules. I mean, apart from some obvious rules that every parent has to go through about that have to do with the child's safety. I think it's all very, very particular to your situation, to your child, to who you are, and to what's important to you. I mean, I'll give you another example. I can think of a couple of other things that maybe are relevant. So, you know, I've written a lot of children's books, and somehow almost all of the books explore the relationship between a mother and a child in some way or the other. So my first book, Kangaroo Kisses, which you can maybe not see here. Oh, I only have the French one here. This is translated into lots of languages, but it's a conversation between a mother and a child, and the child doesn't want to go to sleep, and the mother has to put her to sleep. It was translated into lots of languages in India, it's available in like 8 languages, and my mother actually helped me translate it into Bangla. But and then I have a book called Talkie Tumble, which is about a single mom raising her daughter and how the daughter helps the mother when she's unwell. And so it's about that bond. And then In My Heart, which Megla calls her heart book, is about adoption, about the fact that it's about non-traditional family units. It's about the different ways in which families come together, and sometimes through blood, sometimes not through blood. And there's so many. It's not adoption. It's sort of gay parenting or surrogacy, etc. So a lot of them are about that. My first book was a book called Mambi, which is that book, and as you can maybe able to see, it's called Mambi and the Forest Fire. It's a very, kids really love that book. I mean, it's sort of particularly that one is particularly popular, and I'm kind of very proud of it because it's also a book that's very that's embraced by children with special needs, because it's about the different needs, the different abilities of I mean, children, animals of course represent kids here, but it's about a monkey who wants to fly like her friend Coco the crow, and swim like her friend Tonga the turtle, but she realizes that the fact that she can jump higher than anyone and she can save her friends when the forest fire comes is what makes her special. So it's a book that always has a really strong response. But I mean, there were people who said, well, I don't know that you should talk about forest fires to children because it may be it's something that you don't want children to know about, all the danger in the world. And people sometimes have that, parents can have that protective
hair around
protectivity to their children, and I think they're completely justified in having that. This is what I mean when I say it's a very subjective thing. I personally feel that I don't want, like, there are parents who will not use the word death or die around children until they're 5, 6 or 7 or something like that. I mean, and that's a particular kind of thinking, and that's totally understandable. From my point of view, I feel I'm raising a child in a world where there is war, where there is a pandemic, where grandparents are going to die sooner rather than later, especially if you have older parents like me. And you're not able to protect a child from the idea of death anyway. So rather than not bringing it up, why don't we approach it in a way that feels emotionally safe? So from that point of view, I don't really believe in sheltering a child too much from the realities of life. I just feel that you need to shelter a child from the cruelty of life, but there's a way of making them aware of the truth of the world that we live in, which is a broken world. Also, not only so that they're better prepared, but I also feel it's really important for children to understand at a young age that you can be a change maker. You can actually try to do something to fix this world, and you can start doing that as a child. I feel like I did. I mean, I became involved in child protection when I was very young, when I was a child. And so I feel like if you're going to develop, these children are going to become active citizens, then it's good for them to understand the reality of the world, right? So that's my perspective, and that may not be every parent's perspective, and I fully respect other perspectives, but I just think you have to do what feels right to you as a parent.
Absolutely. So, seems like you are on the mission to make empowered choices and respect other people's point of view within that. And I guess that's amazing. I mean, this is a very interesting conversation, Nandana, and we can, go on for a very long time with this. But I know we have, shortage of time. But before I let you go, I have a special request. I wanted you to read an excerpt from a letter to Ma, something that you dedicated to your mother in the book.
Yes. Oh, I would love to do that. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a letter that I started writing to my mother when she turned 75. And I wrote the letter and I completed it, and she loved it so much that I kept adding to it every year on her birthday. I was going to add to it on her 82nd birthday, but she passed away just before that. And so I completed it after she was gone. But the lovely thing about it is that she had actually read most of it. Sometimes I feel like there's so much that we want to say to people we love, and we don't have a chance to say to them until after they're gone. And I feel like in this one, I feel blessed that I was able to actually share with her how important our relationship, how central our relationship was to me, how much she had influenced me. A letter to Ma. My first semester in college. You arrived in between your conferences, suitcases and admirers in tow. Refusing abundant offers of hospitality in Cambridge, you shared the 1.5 rooms assigned to my 2 roommates and me. Every morning, you stood in line in our noisy dormitory to claim your 3 minutes in the shower. You left after a week, just as I was getting used to finding your hip-length hair in my comb and turning every head in the 1,000-strong Harvard Freshman Union when you swept into dinner with me, gliding in like a queen, like you always did. A few weeks later, we hit midterm exams. I overslept the first day, found the showers occupied, and sprinted down the hall. As I stumbled onto freezing tiles and fiddled with the cranky knob that spurted cold water for red and boiling for blue, something miraculously familiar caught my eye. A crimson dot of velvet on that narrow grey wall. Your well-traveled bindi, carefully transported from your forehead and placed beyond reach of the spray. In a flash, I could hear your laugh and smell your scent. I could feel the tension in my neck melt into the mist surrounding me. That perfect circle of red gave evidence on the mildewed wall that you would always be there, far away, so close. Although there were unending demands on your time, a few years ago you had somehow managed to find several days for us to translate together my bedtime book for children, Not Yet. The book is a playful dialogue in rhyme between a mother and a child. A naughty little girl finds countless excuses not to go to bed. The literal Bengali translation of Not Yet is Ekhoni na, but you had laughed, your own little girl laughed and declared, no, the girl must be much more emphatic. She will say, Ekhoni na, Ekhoni na. Well, this obstinate daughter of yours kept saying to her mother in the last few weeks, Ekhoni na, Ekhoni na. Could you hear me, Ma? Not too long ago, I pulled a big blue book from our Kolkata shelf, 365 bedtime stories. When I opened it, out fell a red gold rush of leaves, oaks, maples, and ferns collected in London when I was a toddler. One night, as you were reading to me about Tinker Bell, I had interrupted you with a technical question. What are fairy wings made of? Butterfly wings, bird feathers, or huge petals? There are all kinds of fairies, you see, you replied. Just as there are all kinds of people. Do all fairies look like you? I persisted. I don't think so, you smiled. Fairies are very beautiful. But Ma, I protested, you're the most beautiful person in the world. You laughed, much more raucously than Tinker Bell ever would. Every little girl believes that about their mother, Tumpush. Well, Ma, I've grown up a bit. My world has grown up a lot. I left home as a child and made beautiful friends who became my family. In my work, I've met many beautiful faces, walked with beautiful figures. I've fallen in love with beautiful minds. You grew up too. More books published, many awards won. A few more clashes with your stubbornly loving daughters. Around your eyes, a few more lines celebrating years of full-throated life. More world tours, many with me, when you swept me away with your infectious appetite for discovery. Remember that list we made of unvisited countries that you absolutely had to explore? Wheelchair in tow, we made it to most entries on the list. China, Egypt, South Africa, but not Burma. Each time we traveled, you transformed our adventures into provocative essays or best-selling books. And on every trip, we shared even more pleasures together than our plentiful arguments. Yes, we did have fights. I cried when you didn't understand. I begged you not to nag. I yelled at you when I was upset with someone else. I watched in panic as tears welled up in your ever-adolescent eyes. But I'm as sure today as I was that night in London that even if you had not been my mother, even if that most precious accident of birth had by rights been the beginning of someone else's story, even if I'd met you in any of your other roles, as a poet, professor, painter, friend, or a stranger on a plane, you would still be the most beautiful person I could ever have met. At the end of Not Yet, the daughter asks, Ma, did you turn out the light? And the mother replies, yes, my dear. Now, good night.
Fantastic. Nandana, thank you so much for sharing that with our audience. And on that emotive, expressive, amazing note, we've come to an end of this conversation. Any last parting thoughts, any last parting, words that you would like to say to our audience on this Mother's Day?
I just want to say that it is such a joy to have my daughter in my life. I want to say that the one thing that I always feel I want to do more of is physically hug, cuddle, physically just show my love to my daughter all the time. And I used to feel differently about disciplining, but now I feel like it's important to bring love into disciplining, and it's important to hug and physically show your love as much as possible, because they grow up so quickly. I mean, she was a toddler a couple of years ago, and now she's this leggy person who's a tween. And
Sure.
I just think you can never spend enough time just physically being close to your child. So enjoy that.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much to our wonderful audience for being here. Thanks a lot, Nandana.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Take care.